Hello and welcome to an Around the Lens interview special. I'm your host, David J. Murphy, and I'm joined for this interview by Seth Porges. Seth is a journalist who co-directed and produced the new HBO Max-exclusive documentary, Class Action Park. This new documentary explores New Jersey's infamous Action Park, one of possibly the most insane and dangerous amusement parks in the world. As mentioned, the documentary will be premiering exclusively on HBO Max starting on August 27th. So if you're listening or watching this after that date, go check it out. In fact, we'll be deep diving into this documentary and exploring all aspects of the story. So if you want to go into the documentary fresh, which I recommend, stop the interview, go get a free trial of HBO Max if you're not already subscribed, watch it, and then come back to the interview. I think you'll enjoy it that much more. Okay, enough of that. Seth, thanks for taking time out today to talk about your documentary. First and foremost,
of course.
I do appreciate it. First and foremost, though, let me ask you this. How cool is it to know that the documentary you've been working on for years will soon be out in the world for everyone to see?
It's the best feeling there is. You know, like you work on something and it just becomes an abstraction at some point when you're staring at computers and you're talking to your collaborators and nobody else in the world can see what you're doing. I think it's somebody who is working on anything, whether it's a documentary or anything that is near and dear to them that the world hasn't seen. You just hope the world will see it. So that's getting out there in a way in which anybody pretty much who wants to see it can see it. I mean, if you can't see me, I'm a little giddy.
No, actually, we can definitely hear it in your voice. I mean, especially now in this kind of day and age with COVID, I mean, are you guys even having like a physical premiere in a theater for this, or is it just the premiere online?
Well, we actually showed at a couple film festivals prior to the launch this Thursday on HBO Max, one of which actually was in a physical theater at the Florida Film Festival. We ended up winning the audience award there, which was awesome. So,
great.
you know, I thought this would play well in a crowd. It's good to know that's true. And we're playing a couple drive-ins as well. So
Okay.
we just played one in Brooklyn this past weekend, and that was amazing because a number of people who were featured in the film who worked at Action Park back in the day were there, and they had not seen the film yet. And they participated in the Q&A. And it's pretty amazing to see their responses, and it's always interesting when somebody's in a movie and they haven't seen the movie, you know, how they feel they came out, how they feel they were portrayed, and you never know, and you're always a little nervous. But they all loved it, best I could tell, you know, and I think they got to feel like movie stars a little bit because it was, you know, a big drive-in setting. There's a lot of people out there. They're to some degree sort of like the closest thing you have to a movie star in a documentary.
No, absolutely. And it's funny to see kind of this resurgence of the drive-in movie theater, you know, sort of as a result of COVID. It's like, I wonder if we'll see this catch on and there might be more new drive-in theaters. Who knows? But hopefully we'll get through the COVID situation soon and people can go to actual theaters again. You know, I've done a few short films myself and premiered them in front of an audience. Do you think the audience reacted the way like you thought they would in terms of, did they react at the points you thought, oh, that'll get a big reaction or that'll get a big laugh? Did you see that, or did they even surprise you about how they reacted?
Well, the thing about drive-in is you have no idea how people are reacting because they're all, you know, everybody's in their little cocoon of a car. So what you want to do then is open your windows, maybe do a little stroll around the parking lot and kind of listen for isolated sounds, but what a distortion that is. So you really have no idea when you play in a drive-in how the crowd is reacting. But I hope they liked it. You know, we did play one actual sit-down theater, I said, for the Florida Film Festival in Florida, and we zoomed into the theater after for the Q&A. I could not be there in person, and the crowd. You know, I spoke to some of the people who were at the screening and kind of asked them after. I wanted to know, how did the crowd react? Did they like it? Did they seem to be along for the ride? And I mean, maybe he was just being nice to me, but it seemed like they did. It's always a little game of operator when you're asking other people how an audience liked your movie.
Right. They want to give you the best answer, right? Oh yeah, no. Exactly. They booed and they left halfway through. It was brutal.
It was good. Yeah, or like a nice. It was good. It was good.
Right. Yeah. They
It
loved
was great.
it was definitely a film that people looked at on the screen for sure.
It was feature length. It was definitely a
Yeah.
feature length movie.
I think I saw somebody wrote like a Cats thing, and it was like, this was definitely a film that came out in 2019 with actors
It
and a
was a movie.
plot. It was a movie.
I mean, I tell
Well,
you, it's hard to get a movie made, and it's no small feat even getting a bad movie made. So
right. Yeah,
I'm in no
absolutely.
position to, yeah.
You kind of wonder how bad movies get made when it's so hard to get a good movie made. You know, it's like,
That,
how does that even happen?
I mean, I think there's a lot of podcasts that explore that very question. I think, but I think that's part of what makes Hollywood so interesting is the process that gets these things from page to screen and what ends up there and how it can, despite it all, sometimes end up being kind of good.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I know from your bio on the Class Action Park website, you've got a very interesting background. You've worked as an editor for Popular Mechanics. You appeared on a Travel Channel show called Mysteries of the Museum. You gave world record length speeches on nerdy issues. And you're a leading expert among pinball. So lots of cool things in your accolades there. Can you talk a little bit about your life growing up and kind of how you kind of came to the point where you are now as sort of being involved in documentary films?
Absolutely. So ever since I was in middle school and, we had like a school paper, all I really wanted to do was be a journalist.
Sure.
I realized that there was something just so thrilling and so exciting about having an excuse to have people tell you their stories, having an excuse to have people open up, giving people a reason to tell things that they may not otherwise tell, and then to tell their stories consequently. Like that was thrilling to me, absolutely thrilling. Being a journalist, it has its ups and downs. There's some parts of about being a journalist that stink, that just absolutely stink. But then there's some parts that are just like the highest high there is. And when you can, when you're in a room with somebody or on the phone with somebody, and they're telling you something that they've never told anybody else before, that's a truly magical feeling. And I spent most of my career as a magazine editor. I worked at Popular Mechanics for a number of years, and while I was at Popular Mechanics, one of the cool things about a magazine like that is as long as a subject kind of somewhat fits into what the magazine is, which is all sorts of cool stuff, basically, you can write about whatever you want. And Popular Mechanics, you better believe, weird roller coasters and amusement parks and rides sort of fit into it. And so when I was at Popular Mechanics, I sort of didn't really carve out a full-time beat, but did a couple articles on the side just related to amusement parks because I love them. I grew up going to theme parks, Disney, Universal, Six Flags, all of them. And then every once in a while, my family would go to Action Park. And it was very, very clear at a very young age that Action Park was very different from all those others. And that story just really, really, really stuck with me. And so, I worked as a magazine editor, and that as a job description doesn't really exist anymore. It just, the magazine world, unfortunately, is really not what it used to be. And, the journalists that survive are the ones who adapt and kind of figure out other platforms, other forms of media, and other ways to use their talents or skills or their passions to do things. And fortunately for me, what I love to do, the thing about journalism that I love, it wasn't the writing, it was the talking to people, it was the storytelling. And there's all sorts of other ways you can do that. And we live now in sort of a golden age of documentaries. And I feel fortunate that we live in a world that I kind of can slot in very nicely into from what I did. And so the first documentary project I was ever involved before I was involved with producing or directing anything, I was on air for many years on a number of TV shows. As you mentioned, I was on the show Mysteries at the Museum on the Travel Channel. Probably did around 50 or 60 episodes of that show. Enormous number of episodes. But I've been on a number of other shows in the History Channel and Nat Geo and Discovery, Science Channel, all those just nerdy shows that play at 2 a.m. when somebody flips on basic cable at their hotel room. Probably going to see me talk about airplanes or something. And I got the sense of how these shows were made and sort of the structure of them. I always had my own stories that I just thought were really interesting and really cool and really worth telling. And, I spent the past several years really developing this one in particular. Uh, my first kind of foray into this topic was 2000. I want to say like 9 or so. I started writing a couple articles about it, gave a couple lectures about it. In 2013, I worked with some great folks, Matt Robertson and Anthony Laser, to develop a short documentary about Action Park. And that was
the one
really,
that came out in 2013.
I can tell. Yeah, exactly. And that went quite viral. And it was really one of the first things that had delved into Action Park with the eye of a journalist, I'll say. Prior to that, there were all of these articles about this crazy, dangerous, extreme amusement park out there. There was a couple weird New Jersey articles. There was an amazingly readable Wikipedia page, which is probably the best thing on Wikipedia if you ever get bored. But I was shocked at how few people had kind of done what my background as a journalist taught me to do, which is actually get on the phone and call people up and say, "Hey, is any of this true? What actually happened here?" And because of that, and because these stories were so interesting on their own, they kind of snowballed into urban legends and suburban legends and myths. And that really, I think, opened up this amazing opportunity to put the lens of journalism to all of these legends and just kind of see what the heck's true here.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I'm glad you mentioned the 2013 documentary because I checked that out, and I really wanted to kind of explore the differences and how you evolved it from the 2013 documentary to the 2020 documentary. So can you talk to me a little bit about the genesis of the film? Like, obviously, you said it kind of was brewing before the short, and then kind of how you made the short, and then how you converted that into the final feature film.
Yeah, so the short kind of began life as a lecture I gave. An event in New York called Nerd Night. I think a video of it's still somewhere online, and really, it was just a really fun romp through this dangerous amusement park and all these legends, all these rumors. But even then, I wasn't doing any serious journalism. I wasn't doing what I just said, getting on the phone and calling people up and asking people what happened. And so when I teamed up with these folks to make the short, and they reached out to me, these Anthony and Matt, after seeing the video of my lecture, we just did the basic thing you would expect somebody to do, which is find people who were involved with the story and actually talk to them. So we went out to the park, which is now called Mountain Creek in Vernon, New Jersey. And we ended up speaking to the son of the owner of the park, the president of the park, and then a number of people who grew up going to the park as well. And we filmed that thing in, I want to say, like 3 days. It was just like some B-roll and a couple of interviews. It was a web video. It wasn't a huge ordeal. It wasn't a high production value thing. But there was something about the way people were describing their stories. There was something about the way they were telling their stories and going to this park that was just captivating. It was this mix of like glee and regret. People who grew up going to Action Park, they'll show off their scars as a badge of honor, as a rite of passage. They're proud of it. And people who went there don't shy away from many elements of the dark truth of it. People will simultaneously, like in one breath, say, this was the most fun, magical, amazing place on the planet. And the next breath say, we should never have been allowed to go there. That place was absolutely dangerous. I saw horrible things. And that weird tension ended up being hilarious. This like dark gallows humor, and not in a way that I felt was disrespectful to any of the victims or the people who were injured there. You begin to realize that the humor that comes from a place like Action Park is so interesting and so compelling because it's kind of like a coping mechanism. It's something we as humans do, is we attach humor to darkness as a way of dealing with it. And you see that on display with Action Park so vividly and so clearly that you just kind of can't turn away. And so we made this short, we put it out there, and it ended up going very viral, beyond our wildest expectations, because of a very specific reason. And that is that a huge number of people grew up going to Action Park, had these stories, had seen these things, water slides that went in complete loops, machines that made no physical sense, bodies flying off hills, injuries happening directly in front of them. Everybody who went there saw something like that happen. Years later, they tell people, oh my goodness, you'll never believe this amusement park I went to as a kid. And the stories were so outlandish that people just simply would not believe them. And eventually, enough people don't believe your stories, you begin to sort of doubt them yourself. And that became, I realized that was sort of the shared experience of growing up going to Action Park, was having outlandish stories that nobody would believe. which is why it kind of became this urban legend, but not really because it was all true. It became something people thought was an urban legend, but was actually for the most part true. And
it's like, how can it actually be that bad, right? That's kind of, I think.
Exactly. And so the short ended up going kind of viral because people were finally like, oh, here's proof. It's like they would send it to their spouses saying, here, I told you I was telling you the truth. It was really like New Jersey Facebook is where it really ended up blowing up. And it ended up causing the park to briefly change its name back to Action Park from Mountain Creek in order to basically cash in on the nostalgia. They realized that instead of sort of running from this reputation and this heritage and this pedigree of being a dangerous place, there's something they might actually want to lean into.
Yeah. Well, I think it's good that you mentioned the trying to balance the darkness of the park with also the lightness. And that's one of the things in watching the film that I saw, you as kind of creators were trying to balance, because it's not an easy story to tell, right? I mean, it's not just the story about the life and times of the park's creator, Eugene Mulvihill. And it's not just recounting the fun and memorable times about those who visited, but there's a good chunk that's about the pain and despair that it caused, especially the one particular family that you had on to talk about, the loss of, the woman's son and the guy's brother. I mean, that was a really heartbreaking story to hear. And, it made me think, like, how did you balance this sort of really downer parts of the story with the, trying to, the more light part? Because for the majority of the film, it's just basically your typical, I would say, not typical, but again, it's more of like, life and times creator. Oh, look at all these cool parks. Oh yeah, I skipped my knee. But then you're like, okay, now we're going super dark with this part. And not only that part, how'd you balance that? But also, did you have anyone else? Obviously more than one person died. Did you try and explore other families that also lost someone?
Sure. I'm really glad you asked the question there. That was probably the biggest challenge in structuring this film, is how do you allow Action Park to be this wild, crazy, oftentimes hilarious, incredibly absurd place, while recognizing that it was a place that some people got seriously hurt or even killed at. And what we realize, I think, is that they can coexist. Like, that's what makes Action Park interesting. If it was just a funny place, it would be funny, but, not that interesting. If it was just a dangerous and dark place, it would be dangerous and dark, but actually not that terribly interesting. We wanted to make a movie that caused you to laugh, that caused you to feel nostalgia, that caused you to feel good, and then a couple minutes later make you question what you were just feeling. This is a movie that is intentionally kind of a little bit challenging. It's designed to make you feel uncomfortable. It's a movie that's designed to make you feel uncomfortable and designed to make you feel a little bit complicit. Because in the first hour of the movie, we hope having a really good time, laughing. And then we don't want you to walk away and say, like, okay, I'm allowed to laugh at this place that hurt people without any consequences. Like, you need to feel some level. If you're going to laugh, you have to understand what, like, the dark side of it. You're allowed to laugh at Action Park, but you have to acknowledge that it also hurt people. And we wanted people to question their own laughter. Was really, I think, a goal of this movie. And I fully expect a lot of people are not going to enjoy that experience. It's designed to make you feel uncomfortable. It's designed to be hard. It's designed to be challenging. It's designed to put you through a kind of steep emotional roller coaster, is what it does. And
maybe like a roller coaster with a little loop at the end of it, perhaps.
Exactly, designed to put you through a loop. Because I think one of the problems with the way Action Park's been treated as a subject is that people tend to just focus on the hilariousness of it. This absurdity that it's amazing this place actually existed. Holy crap, I would go back there tomorrow, right? And you're allowed to feel all of that. You're allowed to laugh at it. And we found is that people who are laughing the most about Action Park are the people who suffered there, the people who got injured, the people who grew up going there or working there. It's a place that they credit as molding them into the person they became. And we realized that the laughter is to some degree coming from outsiders who had nothing to do with it or looking at us and viewing it as hilarious. But the people who lived it are giving us permission to laugh. They're the ones who suffered through it, and they're laughing at it. I think that gives us permission to laugh. But we then need to understand the dark side of that. You can't laugh and then turn it off. You have to laugh, and then feel something as a result of that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think had you wanted to, you could have made a very dark documentary that just focused on the death and the injury and stuff like that. Because again, there's a lot of it, right? And
There's a lot.
The creator, I mean, he's praised in the film, but he's also very much derided and saw it as an evil person. But ultimately, he created a place that caused people death and injury, right? And that he has to account for that, so to speak. And I think you did a great job in doing that in the film. Did you? What do you ultimately want people to take away from their viewing of Class Action Park? Is there something like a call to action, or is it just meant to be a informative and educational piece of documentary content?
I don't want to tell people what to feel after watching this movie. I think it's a movie that's designed in such a way that a good number of people are going to walk away and thinking something along the lines of, oh, kids today are coddled, things were better back then. My childhood was awesome. We didn't have like helicopter parents. We were running around. We were going on these, it was like the Goonies. We were going on these amazing adventures. Action Park was the best place in the world. And then a number of other people are going to watch it and go, how the heck was that thing allowed to exist? That should never have existed. And what we found is, at the drive-in and the very few screenings we've done and the people we've showed it to, it really does kind of spark this debate where some people walk away thinking Gene Mulvihill was the biggest villain in the world. Other people go, Gene Mulvihill got it done. He was a visionary who didn't let mere rules and laws get in his way. And I don't want to tell you which side is right. I don't think either side is right. I think this movie says a lot about you, depending on what you think about it at the end there. Yeah. So no, there's no call to action, but it's a movie designed to make us think about how things are different now than they used to be, for better or for worse.
Absolutely. I'd like to talk a little bit about the background and sort of the making and financing of this film and getting a buyer for it, because I know that was something that was very hotly discussed in the Reddit forum r/filmmakers, and it's where I discovered this film, and I'm so glad I did, and connected with you. Sure. You got this. It's an HBO Max exclusive, right? But the road to kind of getting this film sold was not a clear cut easy one. You tried to get at Sundance, and Sundance didn't accept it, and you had to kind of shop the film around. Tell me a little bit about that experience.
Oh, what makes you think Sundance accept? No. We started making this movie as an independent movie. We submitted to Sundance, but we submitted like a very early cut that I didn't think they would accept. That was never really the path or the goal. Our path, our plan from the get-go was to make a great movie by ourselves that we knew people would love. And I knew something would happen. Maybe that's a little delusional and insane, but I had enough confidence in the subject matter. I had enough confidence in both myself and my collaborator, Chris Charles Scott, that we could make something that was good and that people would want to see. And once we started shooting interviews, being in the room with people and hearing their stories, I've interviewed so many people as a journalist, or like hundreds, thousands of people, and there were a half dozen interviews during this that I have felt more than I felt during any other interviews I've ever done in my life. I've laughed more, I've cried more. I've never otherwise in my life had to fight back tears in the middle of an interview room. That had never happened to me before, but it did while making this movie. I've never been in an interview room where I had to, almost remove myself to keep from interrupting the shot because I was laughing so hard. Like all of those things happen. And we wanted to make a movie that was great. I hope we did. And then we wanted to take it out there as a whole thing. And we did. And we were really lucky that we found these incredible partners at HBO Max. And I honestly, this is going to sound really like trite or whatever else, but like I can't say enough good things about them and the way they operate and as creative partners. Like there was no, you hear all sorts of horror stories about like studio notes or corporate intervention and stuff, and it just wasn't the case with them. There was something about the movie, like they, I think, immediately latched onto the same things about the movie we did and understood, I think, why this would be an interesting subject matter to people, not just in the New Jersey area, which is when you're talking to people, some people might be like, oh, why is this of any interest to anybody who didn't grow up in New Jersey? And like, no, this is not about New Jersey. This is about the 1980s, but more importantly, this is about, how the same thing in life can cause you immense joy and immense pain. And I think they got that. And it was really great working. It was just really great working with them. I mean, it's making a film is hard. Selling a film is hard. It's always hard. It's always, always hard. I don't want to say lucky, but we're really lucky. We're really lucky. And I think, but the luck doesn't come from, pulling a number out of a hat. The luck came from identifying a topic and characters that were just irresistible, is what it was.
No, absolutely. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about your the director of the film, Tris Charles Scott. Sure. As co-directors, what role do each of you play on the film project? How does that sort of work, and what do you think he brought and lent to the film that perhaps you didn't, or how did you each play off your strengths?
Sure. So I'm a print journalist by background. If you said to a print journalist, go make a movie, they would have a very hard time doing that. I needed a collaborator who just knew what he was doing with film more. I think I'm smart enough to know what I don't know oftentimes. Yeah. I was the guy who'd been living in this world for nearly a decade, who'd been accumulating sources, who'd been accumulating stories, who'd been trying to tell this story. And just, over a year and a half ago, maybe like last April, I was visiting Las Vegas for some work stuff, and Chris lives in Vegas, and we were getting a drink and just kind of catching up. He's an old friend, and he's a really great filmmaker who had primarily done some movies about kind of like Ken Burns style documentaries about various cities in America. Really interesting movies about like Waco, Texas, and Shreveport, Louisiana. I knew he was just a really good executor. Like I knew he had a really strong vision whenever he approached a topic and knew how to make it happen, and knew how to make it happen in a way that was just nimble, not bloated, and kind of worked with my own sort of run and gun ethos in the things I approach. And we're getting together, and he's just like, why haven't you done this yet? Why haven't you made this movie? Why haven't you done anything bigger? And kind of right then and there, we decided we're going to do it. And just over a month later, we were rolling cameras. And it ended up being really interesting, and I think really great collaboration, because I'd been living in this world for so long that it was very possible I could have lost sight of what was interesting about it to an outsider. And he was that outsider. He was the one who didn't know anything about Action Park. He could approach the story with fresh eyes and go, that's crazy. That's interesting. That's whatever. And so in the story, so if you actually watch the movie, we can kind of see, I maybe this is a little bloviating here, but maybe, the sort of legend of the Haunted Mansion, the ride at Disneyland, Disney World, is that there are these two Imagineers who had very competing visions about what the ride would be. One wanted to be hilarious. One wanted it to be scary. And that tension is what makes it such a unique and interesting ride, the shift between hilarious and scary. And I think to some degree that the differing points of view that we brought to this project kind of show through in that manner. Not so much a tension between hilarious and scary, although that tension does exist in the movie, but more that I was the person who was really into weeds and was focused on the story and the characters. And he was the person who's like, no, so that this is a story about growing up in the 1980s. This is a story about how things are different. This is a story about, because he had that childhood where you're just left to your own devices, you're running around. And I think he understood that what Action Park really was this hyper-distilled version of a latchkey kid era that no longer exists, that many people miss and many people are absolutely frightened of.
No, absolutely. And I think, you all captured that very well. And I saw that over and over again, again with the talking about the general, anyone could do anything they wanted. You could kind of create your own rules and whatnot, or no rules. And that was very, I think, well explored. How was the film financed? I know there was mention on the Reddit about being privately financed, and I'm just curious, why choose that route over self-financing or group or Kickstarter or, going to a studio and pitching it?
It actually was self-financed. I'm not sure which Reddit thread you're referring to, but it actually was self-financed. So we made the movie completely ourselves at first. Before HBO Max jumped on board. Yeah.
Well, maybe that's what you meant by private finance, because I think sure. Private could be like a private investor, but I guess maybe that's kind of
yeah. And I think when you start making a documentary, there's different ways of making it. You can either sell an idea to a financer, whatever it is, but we made a movie in which people had sweat equity. in which everybody from the editors to directors of photography to our composers jumped onto a project because they liked the project and we didn't know where it was going to end up. And that made it just, I think, very personal for all of us, very fun and collaborative for all of us. And also, I think it really shows in the movie. This is a movie where our editor would be up every night until like 4 a.m, just trying to chisel it into something better and better and better and perfecting it. He wasn't just like punching it, and I think that really shows just the craft and the love and the care that came through from a team, a small team that really wanted to make something special.
And it absolutely shows. One thing that I've not had to deal with in my sort of trying to filmmaking adventure too much is having to like get a lot of like resources and material. And this documentary uses a lot of old footage from, I assume, park goers and the company and other sources like that, not to mention news clippings and whatnot. Can you talk a little bit about the process to acquire this old footage and sort of how do you license it, kind of what goes on behind the scenes there?
Yeah, it's, when you're dealing with people's old home movies a lot, it's really, a lot of it was as simple as kind of putting up a bat signal and saying, send us your home movies, send us your videos, send us your photos. We didn't really know what would come in, and we got some just really amazing footage that had never been seen by anyone, showing off many of the park's attractions and also just the general sense of insanity and chaos. The most striking piece of footage probably in the movie is actual video footage of the looping water slide, the Cannonball Loop. And the story behind that, and actually had been online for a couple of years prior, but the story about how that footage kind of came to be is equally interesting, I think. And, after what it was basically is after I made the short documentary a couple of years back, the former director of operations at the park, who I'd spoken to for that, was cleaning out his garage. And he found this old VHS tape in his garage. It just said Action Park on it, like a handwritten label. Popped it in. Lo and behold, it was a lot of just footage of him walking around the park with a video camera, filming attractions that otherwise, to the best of my knowledge, there's no known video of. And at the very end of it, there's a couple shots of people actually going down that looping water slide. Wow. And that was really important because the slides, the fact that the slide was actually in operation was, again, something that people didn't believe. It was kind of viewed as a myth. And the video footage was of that, I think, said this is real. Not only is this real, but everything else in this movie is real. A lot of the other footage was sent to us by people. Some of it came from me just finding footage people had posted somewhere and reaching out to them and asking. It's amazing how open people oftentimes are about things like that. So just a lot of, I love your home movies. Can we use them? Kind of stuff. And then there were a lot of news clips from back in the day. There was an amazing Headbangers Ball episode from the old MTV show that was shot entirely at Action Park with Alice in Chains, the band. And that's just awesome because it's Alice in Chains and Headbangers Ball, and they're just like talking about that. That doesn't look safe. That ride doesn't look safe over there. Mm-hmm. And all this footage is super important because the movie, we wanted to feel like a time capsule. Yeah. You wanted to feel like you had just popped in a VHS tape of your memories and it was all kind of coming to life. We want a movie that allowed people to sort of live in this era. And hopefully when people want to rewatch so that they can return to this era.
I came off after watching the film thinking like, okay, this is the definitive Action Park documentary, right? Like, I'm sure someone could probably examine it a decade from now and maybe there'd be different resources and material, different stories. But I thought, like, you perfectly captured what it meant to be the park. And, I think you did a great job there. Have you seen any other documentaries about the park? I know there was like Defunctland and some other folks who've been, doing videos and stuff. Have you seen those? And what do you think of them?
Yeah, I've seen all of them. Those are web videos. First of all, Defunctland's awesome. I just got a shout out.
Oh yeah, they're great.
They're like one of my absolute favorite YouTube channels ever of all time. So I had made that short documentary about Action Park a number of years ago. And I think that was actually probably like the first one that really went in depth into the topic in any meaningful way. And a bunch of others followed, but most of them really just kind of hit the same legendary mythological points, the things that are in the Wikipedia page. There was just a dearth of journalism. none of them were talking to anybody at all, really. Um, and that to me seemed like such a missed opportunity. And this is the first documentary, the first feature documentary about Action Park. I mean, it's a very different beast than the web shorts that are out there, as awesome as many of those are. Right. And we hope it's something different. I understand, looking online, people are like, "Oh, why do we need this?" There's some web shorts. I encourage you to watch the movie. I really don't think you'll question that once you see the movie.
Absolutely. With this doc under your belt, it's another achievement in your long list of achievements. What's next for you?
Hopefully some more documentaries. I mean, I had such a good time making this movie. It was fun. It was just so fun. It was a world I never got sick of. And I think when you pick a documentary topic, you're in that world. You live in that world. And if you pick something very heavy and dark, it can be hard. Action Park certainly has its share of heaviness and darkness, but it also has its share of fun. And the highs and lows of living in this world as a filmmaker are so extraordinary. Hearing people beam and recount their absolute favorite childhood memories is something we'll never really get sick of. It's a topic that all these years later, all of these projects later, like, I'm not sick of talking about. People come up to me and they want to talk about Action Park. I'm in, baby. I'm not like, oh, I have to talk about Action Park. I love talking about Action Park. I don't think I could ever be sick of this topic. I think it's so fun and so funny and so dark and frightening and all of that, like, how could you be sick of it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think everything flowed very quickly, and I was intrigued by the whole movie going through. Like, there was no part of it where I was like not interested. So I think the editor did a great job pacing it, kept me going the whole time. So it was very well paced. What would you tell like an aspiring documentary filmmakers who obviously haven't reached your level yet, haven't gotten something, like I've done some short films, but I haven't done a full length film. And I know many people, strive to be, published and have their theater, movie shown on a platform or a theater. What would you tell that aspiring filmmaker?
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, it's all about finding the right subject and the right characters. And that isn't something that necessarily has to cost any or a lot or whatever money. It's if you can find the right person and throw a camera on them, you can make an incredible story, and you can do it yourself. There's really no reason you need to wait for somebody. I mean, it's so cliche. Just make it yourself, but like, it's true. It's true. I mean, look at some of the great movies that are out there. Like my friend Stephen Morris made that Netflix documentary about Amanda Knox. That's just a camera on a couple people. That whole movie, right. And it was nominated for an Emmy. If you look at like Earl Morris, The Fog of War, it's just a camera on one guy. It's really, you don't need, I think a lot of people feel like their movie is never done. It's never done. And they're searching for a story I think though that oftentimes you can do that. If you're lucky, you can film something for 5 years and then find a story and edit. But if you're trying to get something made that you feel good about, that you think people are going to watch, find a character or a story that that you have unique access to. I think is absolutely key. I always, I come from the world of journalism. I can't tell you how many doc ideas I have just from my other journalist friends who have been working specific beats or living in specific worlds and specific stories, and have these stories out there that should be told. What do you know? Like, what world do you know? Who do you know? Who's that weird person you met who nobody else has ever talked to? Like, it doesn't cost money to throw a camera on a person. And if you can get some amazing tape from somebody telling a story that takes you into unexpected places or makes you feel something that you don't expect to feel, like that's really all you need. That's all you need.
That's great. That's my advice. Great advice. No, I'm listening to, I'm in a course right now for documentary filmmaking, and that's one of the big pieces of advice that the instructor says is, find a journalist, because they're the ones who are hunting down stories and having to create stuff out of thin air. And, you can usually, hopefully leverage them for potential documentary ideas and prospects.
And I thought about this a lot. I feel like I'm so lucky as a journalist that I found somebody who knew how to make documentaries. We could kind of team up. And I feel like it's a shame how disconnected the world of traditional journalism is from the world of documentary filmmaking. I know so many really high-level, award-winning, amazing journalists who have ideas, who have stories that would make incredible documentaries. They don't know where to go. So if you know how to make a movie, find that journalist, man. Like read newspapers and look for that person, or magazines or websites, and look for cool stories and find that one person who knows that story better than anybody else. Because what that person can oftentimes bring to the table is, yes, like they know the contours of the story great, but they probably have all the sources lined up. They probably have all the archival material. They probably have everything you need to make the movie, kind of waiting to execute. And if you can find the right person to execute with, I mean, it's a dream team there.
Absolutely. You had a lot of great animated segments during the film. How'd you choose the artist, and what do you think the animated segments added to the overall film?
Yeah, so thank you for asking about the animation. They were done by a really great guy named Richard Langberg. And this idea, okay, so I was before we knew how much archival footage we would have, before we knew how much video we would have actually showing these rides, I thought it would be so cool to animate them, to bring them to life. And I had this idea, like two key parts of this movie came to be kind of at the exact same time. I was driving out to Vernon, New Jersey, where the park was, to meet with some folks to kind of basically try to convince them to be in the movie. And on my Spotify, on my phone, the David Bowie song, All the Madmen, came on. And this song is our closing credit song in the end. And I hear these lyrics, and the lyrics are, I can fly, I can break my arm, I can do me harm. And I'm like, man, this guy is singing about Action Park in 1970. It's a song about breaking your arm and doing harm, and it's got this darkness to it. And then I just sort of visualized, and at this point I thought maybe it'd be like a mini series with opening credits or something. And I just visualized this like kind of opening credits. There was a song playing while Schoolhouse Rock animations that, conjunction junction, but instead of a train, it would be a looping water slide. Like the whole thing just like kind of came to my head while this David Bowie song played. And I'm like, man, like that style of animation, that Saturday morning in the mid 1980s, nostalgic, Sesame Street, Schoolhouse Rock, all those things, it just really takes you back and has that same sense of whimsy to it that a lot of these rides did. And we just knew, like, we wanted the animations to feel like you were clicking on your TV in front of a bowl of Fruit Loops in 1986, and this was on. This is what you were watching, not because it was great, because it was the only thing that would appeal to an 8-year-old on TV, because everything else was adult stuff. And animation is intentionally a little scrappy at points. There's intentional errors in it if you watch it, because if you watch those old Saturday morning cartoons, a lot of times there's problems, like editing issues between frames. So we have some of that in there that I think some people might notice. And we hope it was effective. We hope it was an effective way of both bringing some of the stories to life that we don't necessarily have video footage of, and also capturing just like the spirit of what it was.
Yeah, things like you're not going to capture video footage of the tanks shooting flaming tennis balls.
No. Well, we have video of the tanks, just the cameras weren't rolling when the flaming tennis balls were being fired.
Oh, man. Could you imagine, like, if Action Park existed now with the age of cell phones and GoPros? I mean, you'd be awash with footage from every single angle of every single thing people were doing. That'd be crazy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the park is open under a different name now, and a fair number of the original attractions are still there. But the atmosphere of the chaos, that's not there. So you're unlikely to see just fights breaking out everywhere you look, like you would have back in the old days.
Yeah, you mentioned the music that plays at the end, and obviously there's a great run of music throughout the whole film. Can you talk a little about how you picked the musical artist for the film, and how you set the tone of the documentary with that music?
So the music was primarily done by a duo known as the Holiday Brothers, who are old friends of mine from high school, who I went to high school with. And they're just incredible and innovative musicians. They do all sorts of interesting things, sort of mix music and technology. They got a fair bit of attention a number of years back for these experiments they were doing with location-specific music. So you'd have a phone and basically an app, and you'd walk around, say, the National Mall in Washington, D.C., or Central Park in New York, and the music would change depending on your location. So you'd walk by like the carousel in Central Park, and you hear the sounds of horses galloping as part of the music. And they're just so effective at creating transportive soundscapes. They're wonderful people who I've known forever. And when I started working on this project, they're the first and only people I called up. I'm like, you guys want to do this? And they were in, and I was so glad they were. And really, my only direction to them was take me back in time. Like make it feel like we're going back into the 1980s. And it was inspired a lot. The soundtrack was inspired a lot by sort of the synth-heavy soundtracks that you'd find in like Beverly Hills Cop or The Thing or like Halloween. Those kind of old, creepy synth soundtracks that were really popular in 80s movies, like Nightmare on Elm Street had a good one. Stranger Things kind of played with similar ideas, I think. But we really wanted the music to help it kind of feel a little bit like a dream, the movie. We wanted the music to really just take you back in time. And I just think they did an incredible job.
Let me ask you from a behind-the-scenes perspective on the sound design. Did they score the documentary like you would score like a film, or did they take and create music which was then created in the edit and added to the film that way?
They scored it as if they're John Williams with an orchestra in front of Star Wars.
Wow.
He gave them sections, and they built the music around it. Wow. They synced it, and that was it's not always an easy process. I think the way a lot of films and documentaries are made is you get some cues and you slot them in best you can. We really wanted this movie's music to feel specific, and we wanted it to feel like every second of the movie, the music was written for that second of the movie, which is not the easiest way to do things. Obviously, it's just not the easiest way, but I think it paid off. Music is such an important part of this movie. I think if you took away the music, the movie would just not hit. It would just not hit. It's like it's like watching Star Wars without the score. Like it would just be a bunch of people shooting blasters at each other. It wouldn't hit. And we didn't do it the easy way, but I think we did it the right way.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because I think so many of us who, are aspiring filmmakers or put stuff out there on YouTube and stuff will kind of build our edit to the music, right? We'll build it to the beats. And it must have been difficult, like you said, for your editor to find those beats without any music. Did they use a temp track or they just kind of build it silently?
Yeah, so the initial edits were done with temp tracks, for sure. And they were sort of, things that we would then send to the composers as inspiration. Like, This is sort of the feel we're going for, but we want you to do your own thing.
Right.
And when we were doing the edits, and the initial edits, we weren't really building it to the temp tracks. We were more building it about how we wanted the beats to unravel, how we wanted the beats to go. And then the Holiday Brothers would accentuate that with their music. They did such a good job. I'm really just beside myself. And it was a really great and collaborative process because one of our editors, Michael Garber, just an amazing editor, amazing guy too. He is also just really old friends with our composers. So we were all able to work really, really closely together. Where our editor is constantly in contact with our composer, constantly getting kind of updates of the cues. So if a scene changes, for example, they can make tiny little tweaks and adjustments that make it hit hard because, you're editing up until the last minute. Music isn't necessarily composing music isn't necessarily an instant process. Yeah. But they had a really amazing, fortuitous workflow that allowed the music to be produced kind of in harmony with the edit.
That's good. That's very important because, once you kind of lock that edit and you give that film to the composer, you're kind of committing to your edit there, and then it's like, let me tweak a few things.
And they made changes right up until the last minute. Yeah,
that's
and there was some of that. There were, constantly up until the moment the movie ships, it's never done. Where like it's so hard to say this movie's done when you're like, oh, there's that one thing I want to change. And up until the very, very last moment, the Holiday Brothers were still tweaking with us and still making tiny changes. And they work so quickly, and they're so professional, and they're so good, and they're so committed and so passionate that we were able to make it work. If we were working with some outside composer who we just kind of hired to do a job and they were then clocking out and doing another job and we didn't really know them, I don't think any of that would have been possible.
Right. No, absolutely. You definitely need that kind of close relationship for that type of workflow. Yeah, no, you made me think about the time I did a couple of short films, and I remember rendering the video the night before we were supposed to premiere in the theater. I was like, oh, it's a little dangerous, but, that's kind of the life of filmmakers.
We live dangerously in that regard in this movie. I mean, up until, there's one shot in the movie, it's a photo where this, teenage girl shows off her alpine sideburns. And it's such an incredible shot. And it's so memorable, because she has this big smile on her face. And to me, it captures everything about Action Park. She is clearly wounded, clearly injured, and she has the biggest smile on her face. That came in, I mean, 2 days before this thing shipped, and I was like, we have to get this in. I don't care what, we have to get this in. And you scramble, and you stay up, and you get it in, and you make the changes that are necessary. And I think that, just having a team that is willing to be flexible like that. If my relationship with my editors and our composers and everybody who worked in the film was different than what it was, none of that would have been possible. Just none of that would have been possible.
You bring up an interesting aspect, right? So let's say, obviously this film gets wide release, which it will, and a lot more people see it. And perhaps it'll inspire other people to send unknown footage to you. Could you see yourself creating a director's cut, the Snyder cut, so to speak, of this film in the future, or maybe a follow-up, or an after show type thing with new footage? Could that be something you might see in the cards?
I mean, I think this is our director's cut in many ways. I think it's HBO Max was such a great partner. They weren't really pushing us in directions we didn't want to go. They weren't really making us make any compromises. This is a challenging movie. It's a challenging movie that I think a lot of people might want this movie to be nothing but the fun and games that it is. And it's not. There's a darkness, and there's a sincerity, and there's a sadness to it. And maybe that's at the expense of some of its commercialability, because I think it's going to be hard for some people to watch. It really is. And HBO Max was a great creative partner who embraced it. They didn't push us away from it. While working with them, I think they were just they know what they're doing. They're so good at helping us make the tiny tweaks that we know needed to be made. But when you're so attached to one little thing, you have a hard time cutting it. And once you cut it, you're like, I'm so glad that's gone. I'm so glad that's gone. And I don't think there is another cut of this movie that we made. I think this movie wants to be the brisk 90 minutes it is. We could have made this a 3-hour movie. We could have made this a 6-part miniseries.
Okay.
I think it would have suffered. I don't think it would have been as good.
Okay. Well, there's lots of great stuff on the cutting room floor, I have to imagine. And that's probably another thing, how do you get this down? Were there any parts that you're wish you could have kept in, but ultimately you had to sacrifice it for the pacing?
Yeah, I mean, these are all sacrificed for the pacing. It was sacrificed for the betterment of the movie. There's a lot of things in the movie that, on their own in isolation, I thought were just great moments. But in the grand scheme of things, once you zoom out, they don't work. They don't work in telling your story. They don't work in your arc. They drag the movie. They drag the movie back. They slow it down. This movie has a really fast pace to it, and some of the stories we had are unbelievable. But if somebody takes 5 minutes to tell that one anecdote, you can't really keep that in the movie. It drags things down way too much, as cool as that story is. When we spent in the early cuts of this movie, we spent a lot more time in sort of the act one of it in Vernon and in Wall Street, kind of building up to before we enter the park. But you realize is when people see a movie called Class Action Park, they want action park. They don't want 30 minutes of Wall Street making and a look at this, quaint town in Vernon before the park moved in. All of those things I thought were so fascinating from a journalist perspective, from a storytelling perspective, but they don't make it a better movie. And I think it's really hard. It's really hard for filmmakers to separate good moments from a good movie. Is I think an important thing, because any of these things on their own would have been just great, but when put together, it made it a worse movie.
Yeah, absolutely. Your movie, or actually your short film, inspired the film Action Point, which was a Johnny Knoxville movie, or led to the inspiration for it. Can you talk a little bit about that experience? Did you work with Johnny on his film at all? Did you have a cameo? Were you involved in that at all, or was it just purely inspiration? Perhaps it was consulting role?
I was told it was. Yeah, and I was told it was a direct inspiration. Some people from the park literally told me that Knoxville's producer sent him my short, and then they were like, "We got to make a movie about this." I had nothing to do with that movie. I went to go see it. I think it was just a very different movie than this. I think when I first heard it was coming out, I was worried that it might. I'd always kind of wanted to do something bigger about Action Park, and I was worried that might be the definitive Action Park project. There might not be much room left for something else. Fortunately for me, it was just highly fictionalized. It wasn't the same story. It was it was a comedy, a stunt comedy, which is what Johnny Knoxville does so well. And I think I was somewhat relieved that it was so removed from the true story that there was still room to tell the true story.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You mentioned the Wall Street portion. It made me think there was a couple of clips, like you have a clip from the movie with Leonardo DiCaprio, other things like that.
Wolf of Wall Street, yeah.
Wolf of Wall Street, thank you. What was the process like in licensing? Obviously, you got the home movies and stuff from people who are very passionate about but how do you get like the licensing of the professional films and stuff like that?
Oh, a lot of those are fair use doctrine. And cleared by lawyers who say we can use this many seconds of it in this context and it's okay.
Right.
And those, I think, some of those clips I think are important because they allows you to convey a lot of information very, very briefly. If I had, just like go in from scratch and explain people what penny stocks were and the cultural significance of them, it would be boring and it would drag off and it would take minutes. So it would take time to do. But when you show 5 seconds of Wolf of Wall Street, people instantly go, "Oh yeah, penny stocks, Wolf of Wall Street, I get it," and then you can move on. It's efficiency of storytelling. We use a number of clips from 1980s movies when we are trying to, basically establish how this era was different in terms of kids going on adventures outside of the worried eyes of attentive parents, and I think you can say that to somebody, but then you can be like, no, you know what this is. This is E.T. This is The Goonies. This is The Breakfast Club. This is Stand By Me. And it just conveys so much information so quickly. We have this kind of shared cultural consciousness. We have these shared cultural touch points and reference points that we all can refer to as something being like that. And I think good documentaries use those effectively while, of course, making something new. You're not making a clip show of other people's stuff. But a couple seconds from some of these movies tells you so much information and also evokes so much emotion. That scene in particular, it's like the 1980s, how Action Park was like a 1980s movie, I think is one that, speaking to some people who have seen the movie, that's the one where they nod the most, where it transports them back. And I think that's really, really helped by the music as well from the Holiday Brothers. That's designed to feel like a little dreamy or a little nostalgic, a little ethereal at that point.
In thinking about Action Park, I was trying to think of, the park. Could it have continued to exist today had it been safe and well run with a appropriate, well trained staff? But then I thought, well, if it was safe and well run, would it be this icon that it is? Right? Would it be so well known and have this history and whatnot? And then I started to think, well, in that case, I mean, considering the death and the misery and the pain it caused so many, should it have even existed in the first place? In that, was it worth it for it to exist in the sort of way it was, where it caused pain and death and suffering? Was it worth it for that? Was it worth it for what it was? Am I making sense with that question? I don't know. It's like, should it have existed in the first place?
That's the central question. That's the central question of the movie, I think, and it's one that I think a lot of people are going to have very different takes on. That I think is a central question of the movie. Like, was this way of growing up, was this way of operating with lax regulation and sort of this devil-may-care attitude, was it good overall? And clearly there's good parts of it and bad parts of it. And clearly we lose something and we gain something with it going away. And what I love about talking to people after I see the movie is seeing kind of where they come out on that. And that, to me, that is the central question of the movie. And it's not one, and by design, we don't come down on the side. And I think I've read some reviews where people like the film doesn't know if it's celebrating or demonizing it. It's like, no, we're doing neither. We're doing neither. It's very deliberate. We know what we're doing here. That's the debate. That's the question. And the fact that after watching the movie, you don't know where you stand, I think, is a beautiful thing. that we don't want a movie where people know exactly what to think. We want a movie where people wake up and they go, I don't know. I just don't know. And hopefully we accomplish that.
No, I think you did. And, again, it's a double-edged sword with a topic and a subject like this, because on the one hand, nobody's crying for a documentary about Knott's Berry Farms or Dollywood or any of these other safe...
I would love a documentary about Knott's Berry Farm or Dollywood. Are you kidding me? Those places are awesome. Knott's Berry Farm has the first dark ride anywhere in the country, and you can still go on it, and it's awesome. That is a cool park. Dollywood is awesome. Come on, you got to go to Dollywood. I would absolutely. I will tell you, maybe that'll be my next movie. I'll make a movie. If Dolly Parton got on board, I would make a movie about Dollywood.
Oh my gosh! All right, there we go. We're going to see the theme park series, the full-length, feature-length Defunct Land, so to speak, but not defunct because Dollywood is still active and going.
Hopefully, Dollywood will never. Hopefully, it will never be defunct. Hopefully, it will be there forever.
No, I love Dollywood. I've been there. It's a beautiful park. Kudos to Dolly Parton for putting it together. But again, in the pantheon of filmmaking companies that are looking, like, people see Action Park, and that's got obviously the, all the underlying, deceit and lying and offshore bank accounts or whatever. That's probably not. But I'm saying the insurance company that was a fraud. All these sort of underlying insidious issues, right? That kind of make it sell as the documentary it is, and it's like, it existed in a time, right? And it couldn't exist today. There's no way something like this could exist today. So it was kind of captured in time.
Absolutely. There's no way. And, but Action Park was one of the things I think we hope we convey in the movie is that one of the reasons it was the way it was, one of the reasons it had these strange experimental rides is it was one of the very first water parks in the world,
Yeah.
Like today you go to a water park and you kind of know what you're going to get. There's a couple sort of like off the shelf rides that basically every water park's got the ride that does this and every water park's got the ride that does that. You know what you're getting. Action Park wasn't like that. Action Park, nobody knew what a water park was, and they kind of had to invent it as they went along, as we say in the movie. It was, I think, the third water park in the country. I mean, before this, you had like old style swimming holes, and actually my family, my mother actually grew up in a water park in the 1950s, the early type of water park. And then Wet and Wild came along, and Schlitterbahn and Action Park. Those are the first three water parks. And each of them was run by this larger-than-life, very interesting, very different personality. Gene, I think, the guy who ran Action Park, was the most interesting, the most larger-than-life, the most fascinating, probably also the least known of these people. Wet and Wild and Schlitterbahn are still very much staples of like the water park world. But what made Action Park different was that it was just experimental. People were discovering what a water park was. They were feeling their way into it. There's a lot of rides over there that you see them as like dead ends in the evolutionary tree of water park and ride design. You're like, that's an interesting idea. It never really worked, right? It kind of disappeared. And many of those rides are still there at the park. Like you can still jump off a 20-foot cliff. You can still, the Colorado River ride, which was a raft ride that was just way more insane, way more insane than any raft ride you've ever been on. It's still open. Only today when you ride it, you have to wear like a catcher face mask because too many people were smashing their faces.
Wow.
So it's but yeah, Action Park, it could never exist today. Of course not. And that's what makes it interesting. And that's what makes it fun for people who went there to then share the stories of Action Park with maybe their kids or people who never went there, because people kind of have a sense of disbelief about it all.
You said you went there. Did you ever get injured yourself?
No, I never got injured. I was very young. And so most of the crazy rides, I just couldn't go on, And so they became kind of my own personal myth. You'd see people doing these things and like, wow, that's wild. Was that actually real when I look back at my memories? And that was a big part of the impetus for making this movie and researching the topic in general, was to understand what was real. Like, what did I see that was real?
Considering your experience with it and all the research you've done on it, if you were old enough at the time, would you have ridden, like knowing everything would you ride the rides now? Or back then, I should say, if you were old enough?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think anybody who went on those rides really knew how dangerous a lot of them were. People knew the park was dangerous. I don't think people understood how shoddily built and designed some of the rides were. and the extreme level of danger that was there. Add that with the 1980s teenagers mentality. Add that with a healthy dose of alcohol. Add that with just a general Lord of the Flies atmosphere of chaos. And I think people really pushed themselves further than they should have. Action Park was an extreme sport masquerading as an amusement park. Things like rock climbing, things like skydiving, we understand that they can be dangerous. And so we approach them with a certain level of safety in mind and safety checks. You make sure your rope works. You make sure your parachute works. Action Park was one of these activities, but in the veneer of an amusement park. And when you go to an amusement park, you have thrill rides. They're designed to simulate the feeling of being in danger. And that's the thrill. And you never think like the Tower of Terror at Disney World can actually hurt you. That's part of the thrill, is the simulation of fear, the simulation of danger. Action Park, though, you have these rides that actually could hurt you. And that's what's so weird and different and interesting about Action Park, was that it was basically a collection of extreme sports masquerading as a water park.
Cool. Well, I think that's going to bring us to the end of our interview. Thank you so much for taking time out to do this for me. I really appreciate it. And all the people who I think are very interested in learning more about, Class Action Park and the story behind it. Of course, before I let you go, is there anything else you'd like to add that I didn't think to ask?
No, it's great to be here. It's great to chat with you. It's really great to chat with you. And the movie comes out this Thursday. Check it out.
Awesome. So much. Thank you for your time, Seth. All right. Thank you again, Seth Porges, for being a guest on the show. This has been Around the Lens Interviews. And go check out Class Action Park. It's an awesome film, and I highly recommend it. All right, Seth. Thanks again. Have a great day.